And his success gave Americans the thought that we were what? Winning the race for space, because we had outdone what Yuri Gagarin had done in space. One of the best quotes there just before John Glenn took off was Alan Shepard said, "Godspeed, John Glenn." And you can hear that before the takeoff. Okay? Now, Glenn never flew again as an astronaut until he was in his 70s. Why? Why did he not fly? He was they had a ticker tape parade for him when he got back. President Kennedy welcomed him. He spoke at both houses of Congress when he got back. Why, Elise, did he never fly again until his 70s? He actually flew on the space shuttle when he was in his 70s. Why did he fly between them? Why did he fly, why did he go into the Gemini or maybe go into the Apollo missions? Anybody know? No? They wanted to keep him alive. President Kennedy grounded him because he did not want this new American hero to go back up into space and be killed, because this was dangerous. I'll give you a preview. When John Glenn was coming back into Earth, there was some problems with the heat shield that protects them as they come through the atmosphere, and they thought he may burn to death on the way down. They were very scared. And so when he got back successfully, he was grounded by President Kennedy. Never flew again until he went up with the space shuttle in his 70s, which was a great story.
Is that the story in Hidden Figures?
We're going to watch that. Oh, it's a great story. So, in going on with this, John Glenn, getting him into space was so important that NASA just went nuts on this, and it brought up a great story, a hidden story about 3 African-American women who, without them, this would have not happened, that didn't come out till last year. It's one of the best. I've showed hundreds of videos in my career. This may be among the best I've ever seen. And I think it combines civil rights, which we'll be talking about, and these 3 women's contribution to the space program. We're going to watch it before we test at the end of this material. Now, what did John Glenn do afterwards? If he didn't fly, he went into politics. And he was elected to the United States Senate in 1974, and he represented the state of Ohio, serving until 1998. Now, there's a pretty good story behind that, because many years ago, I called, just for the fun of it, I called the Senate office of Ohio, and I asked if I could talk to Senator Glenn. I'll be danged at that time if he just didn't pick up the phone. You just don't see things. And I visited with him and told him about the class. I said, man, is there any way I can bring my class there to meet with you, because we talk about you? And he was very, very kind, but very realistic. He said, you know, my first responsibility is the constituents of Ohio. And I am so booked with these trips that I'm sorry, but I can't fit you in. I said, well, could you send me a picture? And he said, yeah, would you like a Senate picture, or would you like a Mercury astronaut photo? And I said, I would like the Mercury astronaut photo. So that is one of the ones I have up there that was personally written to me. And again, that's very, very dear to me, because that was something that, especially when he passed away last year, it became, well, it was amazing on eBay. You looked on eBay, like within 45 minutes of his passing, people were taking stuff off, like signed books, and relisting them for like 3 and 4 and 5 times the amount of money that they were asking prior, because he hadn't been obviously going to sign anymore. He's the second one from the bottom. Yeah. He's in the black and white astronaut suit, biggest, second from the bottom of the side. Okay, that'll take us to our next Mercury flight, which was Aurora 7. A-U-R-O-R-A. Aurora 7. And that was May 24th, 1962. May 24th, 1962. Aurora 7. And this capsule was commanded by Scott Carpenter, who became the second American to orbit the Earth. Scott Carpenter, who became the second American to orbit the Earth. He circled the Earth 3 times, and what was cool about he became the first man in history to photograph the Earth from space. Took photographs, which was really a big deal at that time. So, May 24th, 1962, Aurora 7, commanded by Scott Carpenter, who became the second American to orbit the Earth. He circled the Earth 3 times and was the first to photograph the Earth from space. He was also the first American to eat solid food in space. First American to eat solid food in space. Now, he had a little trouble, too, coming back to Earth. His spacecraft landed about 200 miles off target in the ocean. Not a good thing to have a little capsule 200 miles off target, because anything can happen, as did with Liberty Bell 7. So he lands 200 miles off target, and he actually lost contact with recovery forces for over an hour before they found him. And that was nervous in NASA, because you never know, these capsules weren't made to float for hours. They're made to splash, get the astronaut out, and go from there. Well, again, you don't have to write this latter stuff down if you don't want. In 1965, Carpenter took a leave of absence from the Mercury project, and he decided he wanted to be an aquanaut instead of an astronaut in this Navy's new Man in the Sea program. And they were bringing deep sea divers and doing that type of thing, exploring underneath the ocean. And he turned in his astronaut clothing, so to speak, for aquanaut training. Well, he resigned from NASA in 1967. Leg injuries ended his career, and he retired, and he died of a stroke at the age of 88. So he lived a pretty darn good long life, that being Scott Carpenter. Okay, our next flight then was October 3rd of 1962, Sigma 7. Sigma 7. October 3rd, 1962, Sigma 7. And it was commanded by Walter Schirra Jr. And he became the third American to orbit the Earth, but he orbited the Earth 6 times. He went around 6 times. So commanded by Walter Schirra Jr., he became the third American to orbit the Earth, and he circled the globe 6 times. Now, he was a great pilot. He had flown over 90 combat missions during the Korean War prior to becoming a pilot for the Mercury project. He was a very, very established and proficient pilot, flying over 90 combat missions. Surprising he survived, frankly. 90 missions is a lot of missions. He also flew in both the Gemini and the Apollo programs. And this is a great story. He flew Apollo 7. And he caught what was perhaps the most famous cold in NASA history. Okay, most famous cold. That's sick up there. And he took a new drug. It wasn't a prescription drug. It would be like Contact or some of these other allergy antihistamine type drugs. And it was called Actifed, which is on your ID sheet. So he took Actifed to relieve his symptoms in space. So guess what happened, Paris, when he got back home? He became the leading spokesman for Actifed and made a lot of money, because that's the drug you take if you're sick in space. Actifed. You know, can you imagine what the commercials? I'll have to see if I can find one on YouTube and show you. It'd be kind of funny. But anyway, Walter Schirra Jr. became the lead spokesman for the drug. He appeared in many, many commercials advertising Actifed as what you need if you have cold symptoms. Because if it works in space, it will work on the ground. Okay? Well, he retired from the Navy in 1969, and he passed away of a heart attack in 2007, and his ashes were also committed to the sea. So Walter Schirra Jr. retired from the Navy in 1969. He passed away in 2007 of a heart attack, and his ashes were committed to the sea. The final flight was called Faith 7, and it was May 15th and May 16th of 1963. May 15th and 16th of 1963. And it was commanded by Gordon Cooper Jr. Gordon Cooper Jr. Now, it took 2 days, so he orbited the Earth 22 times. And it would be the last solo flight in space history. From this point on, more than one astronaut would be going on the same mission. So he commanded Faith 7. He orbited the Earth 22 times in the 2-day period. Some other things he did is he was in space 34 hours, 19 minutes, and 49 seconds. Obviously, the longest anyone had ever been in space. 34 hours, 19 minutes, and 49 seconds. Now, how fast did the first one travel? Anybody remember that in their notes? How many miles an hour? Was it 3,000? Was it 5?
Yeah, 5,000.
Okay. This one went 17,547 miles an hour. 17,547 miles an hour compared to the 5,000 miles an hour with the first flight. He also flew the Gemini mission, and he flew on Gemini 5. The significance of Gemini 5, it was an 8-day, 120 orbit mission. And he went up with a fellow astronaut, you don't have to write it down, by the name of Pete Conrad. But he flew in Gemini 5, it was an 8-day, 120 orbit mission. Well, this is a great story. He got pissed off at NASA because he got overlooked to command Apollo 13. Lucky, right? So you remember the story behind Apollo 13 where they barely got back? They had the movie about it. Tom Hanks played Jim Lovell. Well, he got overlooked for Jim Lovell. He wanted to command Apollo 13, and he quit. Got mad and quit. And he entered private business. And he died at the age of 77 in 2004. He was cremated, and they took part of his ashes, and what did they do with them? What? Put him in space. Put him in orbit. Yeah, put him in orbit. That would be Gordon Cooper Jr. So, let's think about this a minute. How many flights did they send up from May 5th, 1961 to May of 1963? In 2 years, they set up how many flights? 6. What? Have we set up that many flights in recent history? It usually takes us 2 years or so to send up one flight. But somebody didn't fly. Who didn't fly? Which one of them? Donald Deke Slayton did not fly. He had an erratic heartbeat, and they grounded him. So he didn't get an opportunity. They would have flown another mission, I'm sure, if he was able. Now, this is kind of interesting. He stays in the space program, and he becomes a director of flight crew operations. In other words, the chief astronaut on the ground when they were sending up the Apollo missions. Guess what his claim to fame is? Guess what flight he was in charge of on the ground? Apollo 13. The one that got back after a disaster. Matter of fact, their chances of even getting back, because they stirred their oxygen tanks and it shorted and their oxygen was leaving, so they had to whip around the moon and get back. In the meantime, they had to put together all these weird things to get the oxygen back. And even after all that trouble, they were so off course that their chances of coming in safely were like putting a piece of paper against a basketball. That was the fine line that they had to come in on. So, I mean, it was a remarkable story. And Donald Deke Slayton was the flight crew operations commander during Apollo 13. He retired in 1982, went to work in private business, and he died in 1993 of a malignant brain tumor. But those are your Mercury 7 astronauts. Okay, that'll take us to our last subtopic today, and I don't want you to write anything down. I want you to just listen, and it's called Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures, because you know what we're going to start tomorrow off with? The movie Hidden Figures. Okay, now I want you to listen so you know. Before John Glenn orbited the Earth, or Neil Armstrong orbited the Earth, or Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, a group of dedicated female mathematicians used pencils, slide rules, and adding machines to calculate the numbers that would launch astronauts into space. Among those group of dedicated female mathematicians were a group of 3 exceptionally talented African-American women. Originally math teachers in the South segregated public schools, these 3 gifted women answered Uncle Sam's call during the labor shortages of World War II. With new jobs at the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory in Hampton, Virginia, they finally had a chance at jobs that would push their skills to the limit. Even with racial discrimination segregating them from their white counterparts, These women helped America achieve one of the things it desired the most, a decisive victory over the Soviet Union in the Cold War and a domination of the heavens. Starting in World War II and moving through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement and the space race, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and Katherine Johnson faced challenges and used their intellect to change their own lives and our country's future. We do not get John Glenn into space without these ladies, especially one in particular. Last year this came out. I didn't know the story. It was hidden for 50 years. Nobody said a word. Okay? It came out. We took the kids last year to the movie theater and watched it. And it was awesome because they had been through the civil rights a little bit more than you guys have, but you'll understand when you watch it. But this is one of the greatest, most inspirational movies that I've ever seen or ever had the privilege to show kids. So we're going to take some time and we're going to watch this the next couple days, whatever it takes, and then we'll finish our lecture with 1962 at a glance, and then we'll have a review and a test. What I want you to do is really key into this tomorrow and pay attention, because it is one of the greatest stories in American history, in my point, that didn't come out for 50 years. Okay? So that's what we're up against tomorrow. So you don't even have to bring your binders, just bring yourself and a writing utensil, and I'll take care of the rest.
Trash, take the trash.